with Abrar. Thanks. Starting with Abrar, who is a rank and file organizer with our union, a fifth-year PhD candidate from molecular and cell biology, and current GSR, former GSI. And so I will hand the floor over to Abrar.
Hi, everyone. We have convened this meeting because we stand at a crossroads. Soon we will learn the outcome of the ratification vote. On the eve of our 6th week of the strike, we will discover whether this fight is over and we return to our lives as instructors and researchers, or whether it will continue and we engage the uncertainty and seize the potential wins ahead of us. The audience for this event is broad. We wish to address those who voted against the contract in the hope of winning something better, but who remain apprehensive and unsure about the road ahead. We also wish to address those who reluctantly voted for the contract, exhausted after 5 weeks of personal and professional sacrifice, convinced that our power was behind us and that the risks outweigh the gains, resigned in a belief that the end of the road had already been reached. In particular, we wish to address researchers in STEM fields. With firm instructions from the union about the maximalist parameters of our research strike, we walked out of our labs to clash with the UC system and press our hands on the scales of justice. We went on strike to pursue a slate of demands written and proposed by poor, non-white, parent, disabled, and international SRs and ASEs. Without historical precedent to guide us, each week of the strike, we walked a dimly lit road, struggling to measure our leverage, contending with internal doubt and external discouragement, our faith often wavering as we faced down pressure and retaliation from above. We were told as early as the first week that our strike was losing power. Against all evidence from labor history, the typical spoken justification for this was fewer picket signups and never the accumulated effect of our work stoppage. As we sensed little movement from the UC, we also watched a majority of union electeds concede our central demands in what appeared like a free fall toward the status quo. First, workers with disabilities, then international students and parents saw their demands sold down the river. The UC proposed a paltry wage increase that did not dissuade the admin caucus from declaring a historic victory, but rank and file members rose up in force and our leadership held the line. We call on them to continue to do so. A week later, the UC suddenly reappeared with a modestly increased pay bump. In a moment, a storm of propaganda was unleashed, urging us to move forward and ratify the contract at once, exhorting that impasse and regressive bargaining could undo our progress if we did not. We have brought a labor lawyer with nearly a half-century of experience to address these topics later. In many STEM departments at Berkeley, where strike fatigue and discouragement is high, last-minute town halls played the role of strike-breaking interventions. Before we had time even to parse the implications of the contract, the proposal was tentatively agreed to. Official UAW communication channels have twisted our arms into voting yes to end the strike. When this overt distortion of democratic process was questioned, a UAW surrogate on our campus released an email saying, quote, "Because a duly elected statewide body of our union voted to endorse a yes vote, it is now the official position of our union. As a result, membership lists and other resources may only be used to share information in favor of a yes vote," unquote. This is not common practice for contract ratification in labor unions. When we demand that we can do better, we repeatedly hear that the strike is too weak and that the UC will not budge. The first reason offered, that the strike is weak, locates our strike power not in the material damage we inflict on our employer, but in the threat of damage we have yet to inflict. Our union electeds chose to TA this offer mere weeks before an act of mass grade withholding that would threaten the university's accreditation and jeopardize the start of the spring semester. Why, if our employers only worried about the possibility, not the reality of grade withholding, would UC Berkeley have postponed its grading deadline by 2 weeks? To confuse the threat of this damage with the actual infliction of that damage is to say that a strike is merely a demonstration of a power it does not ultimately exercise. This rejects the logic of a strike as it has always been understood. Does the boss depend on our labor or does it not? While trickier to demonstrate because the progress of research labor is not always measured according to fixed outcomes and organized around specific dates, the same logic applies for a continued sustained research stoppage. Our two dissident bargaining team member guests and Jackie, a rank and file organizer from integrative biology, will address this point further. The second reason offered for why we can't win more is that the UC has made its final offer and will move no further, not on wages, not on NRST, not on dependent healthcare. Here, there actually is a basis for this claim. Namely, this is what every employer has said at every point in every strike in history between one concession and the next. For the employer not to say this is for the employer to do the work of the strike itself. For this to be such a common line of our union representatives is for them to embody the logic of the employer and frankly, to have abandoned the cause of labor itself. And so contrary to what we've been often told, our strike is strong and we can win more. There is still a great deal of worry, both from those who voted yes and those who voted no, about what happens if this contract is voted down. Here is my response to that worry. If we do succeed in voting down the contract, it will mean quite literally that tens of thousands of workers across the state agreed that they were ready to keep fighting, even if just a few more weeks for a better contract. For this very reason, no votes are rare, but when they do happen, they reveal a colossal amount of existing strike power and help repair a dysfunctional relationship between the existing union leadership and the rank and file. There are virtually no recent examples of a no vote resulting in a poorer contract. On the other hand, no votes have recently led to transformative improvements, not only in the contracts, but in the unions of Detroit Fiat Chrysler plant workers, John Deere workers, and Columbia student researchers, two of whom you will hear from shortly. A no vote is not a rejection of the union, but a refusal to collude with the boss to weaken our union. It is a yes to creatively restructuring the union from the ground up into something that is driven not by the union bureaucracy's need for a rapid contract to begin collecting dues, but instead by the newfound autonomy and confidence of a militant rank and file. And what happens if tomorrow the contract is voted through? Then tomorrow will be the beginning of another struggle, the long haul struggle, because the process that led to this TA was not democratic. And we researchers were instructed to withhold our labor in a way that was uninterested in the intricate reality of our form of work, that was only compatible with a short fleeting strike, a strike that we now know could only ever shift the dial imperceptibly beyond the status quo. If you haven't voted yet, I urge you to vote not based on what you hear from people who do not think that the boss depends on your labor, nor based on some hunch or prediction of the power we will or will not have in the new year. Vote according to your own belief about whether this contract is an appropriate outcome of the largest academic workers' strike in US history. Vote according to your own sense of whether this contract meets not only your needs, but also creates an equitable UC for international students, parents, and other marginalized academic workers that authored our central demands. If enough people agree with you, you will discover on the other side of the ratification vote that the power to keep going will already be there, waiting for you to continue this fight, our strike, to win. Thank you.
Thanks, Abrar. An awesome start to this. Just for folks who are just getting in, we're going to have a few speakers, and by a few, I mean quite a few more, and then we'll transition to Q&A at round 2. So next we have Mark Woodall, who is joining us from the 2865 bargaining team member at UC Merced, who voted no on this recent TA. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that. It's a pleasure to be here and to discuss this topic with everybody. I would first introduce myself. I am a 6th year in physics at UC Merced. I work in a quantum optics laboratory. So I would like to share perspectives today that are both from my perspective as a member of the bargaining team in the teaching assistants unit, but also as an organizer in STEM, as somebody who has spent a lot of time working in STEM departments and working in STEM organization and trying to figure out for the better part of the last 9 or 10 months exactly what a researcher's strike would look like. This was not an easy topic to understand when we set out on this, 9 or 10 months ago, because this is something that effectively has never been done at scales like this before. I know we have colleagues here from Columbia today who've probably given the best shot that anyone ever has at this, but we don't know how to do STEM strikes. We don't know how to do research strikes where we have these conjoined outcomes of workers whose actual futures and whose education depend on the work they do, but also simultaneously are benefiting bosses, are benefiting supervisors, are benefiting the universities. Both of these things, are constantly working together this entire time. But the first thing I would like to, give perspective on is maybe some background on what exactly our view was as bargaining team members. So I've been a part of the 2865 bargaining unit since, the fall of 2021, and have been working on this for a long time. It became very clear early in this strike that the work of researchers and teaching assistants, for obvious reasons, was going to have a lot of overlap, and our futures were going to be joined together in very important ways. We knew this was the reality from the beginning, and we also knew that core features of both of our demands were going to show up in both contracts. So, for example, those issues that affect us kind of as students and employees together, NRST, our access needs. For that matter, wages, broadly speaking, are similar for workers across our two systems. We knew that all these things needed to be negotiated together. We also knew that there were two different visions of what a strike looked like in the UC system, in higher education. One vision was built around what I'll describe as shock and awe spectacle. This was the idea that the more sudden, the more thorough, and the more rapidly we were able to bring institutions to halt, the more that we would be able to maintain, the more concession we would be able to draw. The alternative vision here was an analysis of the value that we provide to the university. And that vision was that we, as workers, are primarily, our jobs are not like, say, certain infrastructure jobs. It's not like we're longshoremen working in a port. The port doesn't stop the second that we walk off the job. Our realization was that our work, which is valuable, takes longer. There are inflection points along the way. And because the effects and the value of our work take longer, it was going to require a sustained amount of pressure to make the university move. All of the moves that myself and my colleagues on the bargaining team made, or moves that we tried to make in the minority on the bargaining team, were in service of the idea that we should not be moving rapidly on certain issues in negotiations. Most importantly, we should not be making rapid concessions, because in our view, the university was not prone to rapidly concede to what we were demanding. We were told many times that the UC was about to fold. We were told many times that just by having the sheer strength of this large strike authorization vote, that was going to bring the UC to its knees, and that didn't happen. And then we were told that, well, sustained strike for a week or two. This is what's going to bring the UC to actually make serious offers to us. That didn't happen. Then we were told that by dropping dramatically from our demands, getting rid of the transformative language in our access needs article, getting rid of our demand for COLA, for cost of living adjustments, getting rid of large chunks of our base wages, we were told that by backing away from this process, we would entice the UC to see that we were serious, and they in turn would give us a response that was appropriate. What happened instead at that point in time when we made these large jumps was the UC changed their offer from a 7% wage increase to a 7.5% wage increase. None of these things led to the UC dramatically moving in our favor. What did lead to the first serious offer the UC made to us was sustained pressure. And finally, when we got to the 15th of December, as we had grading deadlines and chaos approaching, chaos across the system, finally, we saw the UC actually move to make serious offers. My colleagues and I who voted no on the tentative agreement have been very cognizant of this fact for a long time. And we have felt that the correct way to approach and to move forward in this process was to hold out. Our view was that there are significant factors ahead of us that make it likely that the UC would make further movement. The winter quarter starts on January 4th. Starting a quarter, not only with a grading strike that is still going on, but without teachers and researchers to start a semester and a quarter was something that we realized would be very powerful. We were not suggesting that this strike was infinite. We were not suggesting that our power was infinite. What we were suggesting is that there are very clear and obvious concrete events coming up that we wanted to take advantage of. And we did not feel that it was an appropriate time to vote on a contract that was wildly insufficient. To that end, this is where I would like to just mention a little bit about what my view as an organizer in science is. At UC Merced, 2/3 of our campus is actually STEM. It's a very STEM heavy campus. And most of our senior organizers and leadership here are in some STEM or engineering field. We're very familiar with exactly what it needs to take to have a sustainable research strike. And we have already made great efforts here as time goes on to figure out more sustainable ways. I know that some of my colleagues later on in these speeches today are going to be discussing exactly what a sustainable researcher strike looks like. But a strike that is not built around shutting down laboratories completely, keeping workers away from their dissertations and their qualifying work, that is not a strike that is sustainable. We believe in a sustainable strike for researchers. And I think as we go forward today, we'll hear from others that have some more specific and concrete ideas about how we can enact this. But we certainly believe that it's possible, and we don't believe that we're done yet.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Next, we have a distinguished guest. Joel Block is a retired labor attorney, union leader, and rank and file activist with decades of experience in many roles in labor movements, including a blue-collar activist organizer leading a strike for a cost of living clause, an attorney or an in-house union attorney, and even in management as a negotiator for California State University. Today, he is going to provide some insight on the implications of a no vote at the bargaining table and how he thinks of the legal issues that relate to bargaining, including impasse, progressive bargaining, and final offers. Joel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and I'm so happy to be able to meet with all of you. You've worked very hard to get where you're at. You've accomplished a lot. You're very talented. You're very diverse. And you've shown a lot of courage to the world. This is a historic strike. I know it's hard when you're in your 20s or 30s to perceive when you're in the middle of a major historical event, but you are. I've been in the labor movement since I filed a grievance the day I got off probation as a blue-collar janitor at the University of Michigan in April of '70. So in April '70, I was probably 21, 22, and I dropped out of school in my 4th year at the University of Michigan to join the working class. And this gives me some perspective because I've been a blue-collar worker for 8 years, a union president at the University of Michigan. I've been a lawyer. I got a graduate law degree from NYU in labor law. I've represented everybody from New York Times reporters to Hollywood screenwriters, to IRS agents, to cops, to firemen, to local government. I've been in management for 12 years at Cal State University at the highest levels. I've been inside the secret meetings with the trustees, talking with the labor relations bargainers. So I have a good handle on what is historic and what is not historic. This is definitely historic. You need to understand that when you're focusing your day-to-day lives, it's not just, you're not just making precedent for yourselves in your own personal careers. It's for a whole class of people that are in their 20s and 30s. I get emotional when I think about what's happening around the country with people of your age that are fighting to organize themselves. Oh, my grandparents had to do it. My parents had to do it. Your parents probably had to struggle, and struggle teaches everything. And I want to talk about some of the legal issues, but I was an organizer first. I was a rank and file organizer long before I became an attorney. I started law school at age 30, and I've been a very successful lawyer, but my love and my dedication is to helping people like yourselves learn more about what it takes to be successful. Because without success, it's hard to teach anybody. So it's always nice to have a successful outcome. And I guarantee you, if you go forward and look at each of yourselves as organizers, organizing the rest of your peers, not just at your campus, but the rest of the state, and just using plain common sense of solidarity and togetherness, it's not so scary to get through this time, because emotional fear paralyzes your logical thinking sometimes. And you've accomplished a lot with your logical thinking, and you should do so in this environment right now about labor relations and the strike. So for example, I've been told that there are some fear factors contained in the concepts of impasse, in the concept of last offer, and I think there was one other, regressive bargaining. But to break those down and to demystify those concepts, impasse is just a step in the process of negotiations. It's just something, it's a hoop that the state and the legislature provided for public employment. It doesn't exist in private employment. It's not part of the NLRB. So impasse is a concept in the NLRB, but what happens in California after impasse for public workers, required fact finding, those are not in the federal labor law that applies to private sector workers. Another factor you need to know is that mediation after impasse is going to be just like mediation before impasse. You have an outside person who has some experience and skill in labor relations. The mediator goes back and forth between the two bargaining teams, sometimes between the two bargaining chair people, and tries to cajole them, coerce them, persuade them to make concessions, to make compromises, to move closer together to get a deal. That's their role. That's all they do. They try to threaten, they do everything possible. Sometimes they even lie to one side or the other. It's just, they'll make up something like, well, if you offer this, they'll probably accept it. They may not know that. They may just say that. And they'll just trying to cajole the parties to reach an agreement. But that's all it is. Any experienced bargainer who's ever been in mediation knows the role of the mediator is just to get a deal, not the quality of the deal. Second of all, fact finding is just a quasi hearing. So you have a fact finding panel, a neutral that's appointed by PERB, and one representative from the union, one from management, 3 persons, and they listen to each side present, as if it's in a court or an administrative hearing, their arguments for why, their facts and arguments, why their proposals are best, why their proposals should be in the final report and the recommendation for a settlement. And then the 3 members of the panel go into executive session, and there's a discussion and a lot of back and forth bargaining as well. And then the fact finder, the neutral, ends up deciding, well, I'm going to recommend this. So usually the fact finder's recommendations is endorsed by one side or the other who likes the deal that the fact finder has proposed. So that becomes the 2-to-1 vote that makes it a fact finding report that's issued to the public, to the bargaining teams on both sides, and then more bargaining takes place. That's the thing you need to know. Just because there's a recommended report after fact finding that's publicized, neither side needs to agree to it. They don't have to agree to all the terms of that. They can cherry pick it. What it does is creates an environment for more bargaining once you see the neutral's recommendation. So there's more bargaining at that point. And then, and only then, if they finally reach a real impasse again, then at that point, the employer can choose to implement some or all of the last offer that it made in bargaining, whether it was bargaining before impasse or bargaining as a result of mediation or bargaining in the fact finding, what you had them, if it's an actual offer, it's the last actual offer that the employer has made, they can implement if they choose some or all of those parts of the offer. So I hope I've demystified that part. The last offer concept is just, they say that, but ultimately the last offer is what was on the piece of paper, what the terms that were on the last piece of paper, the last package offer, and all the unresolved articles. Whether they're going to change that, they usually do. Certainly after a no vote is a signal that both bargaining committees miscalculated the sentiment of the rank and file. That's what it represents. They miscalculated their guess on where a majority plus one would vote. That's all. No one can predict that. So I don't like to personally attack any bargaining team member, even when I was in the rank and file, disagreed with the leadership on settlement. It's not personally, the bad deal is coming from management. It's not coming from the bargaining team. The bad offer is coming from the highest levels, and the legislature doesn't underfunds the university. Just keep your sights on the people really responsible. So I'm going to wrap up now. I'll be available for Q&A after every other speaker has had a chance to speak. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joel. Next up, we have Jacob Fontana from the SRU bargaining team at UC Santa Cruz, who voted no on the TA. Jacob?
Yeah, hey y'all. I'm Jacob. I'm a fourth year in the stats department at UC Santa Cruz. I'm an alternate on the SRU bargaining team. I guess where I want to start off is, I think what ultimately led to this split vote is that there was, I think, as Mark alluded to, like a deep disagreement in strategy in the team. But I think more than that, a deep misunderstanding or difference in understanding of where our power comes from. I think the majority of the team viewed the power of the strike in one of potential disruption. They viewed the strike in the same way that you would think of a protest or directed action. It's important to get a lot of people out there, to have a big spectacle that gains a lot of media attention, and that would rattle the university into making a lot of concessions. And I think a side effect of this thinking is that the framings around power have always been questions of, are labs completely empty? How many people are signing in to picket shifts, right? And as soon as picket line numbers started to go down, as soon as, even in the first week when picket line numbers didn't line up with the number of people that voted in the SAV, there was a fear that our power was, in imminent danger of collapse, right? And I think this way of thinking, you'll hear lines from people, some on the bargaining team, some not, but things like, we are most powerful the day before the strike begins, or we're most powerful in the first week. We've reached peak power. And again, this only makes sense if you think of the power of the strike as something that's, a scare tactic to the university. I think the rest of the team, those of us that voted against the tentative agreement, had a different understanding of power. That the power of our strike really comes from the actual exercise of our power, the exercise of withholding labor, and that this creates a slow and cumulative disruption on the functioning of the university that eventually becomes unbearable for the university, and that is what leads to concessions at the table. And I think, that, as Mark alluded to, I think, given the kind of nature of our employment, these are not things that are immediate the way they might be for a factory or like a dock, right? These things take, many weeks before these types of impacts are felt, right? The university doesn't care a lot if, classes aren't taught for a week. They do care a lot when grades aren't submitted, when they have, potential concerns over, accreditation or financial aid obligation or reporting obligations, things like that. When we're actually, jamming up the bureaucratic machinations of the university. And so I think what I really want to talk about here is what actually, I guess before that, one other thing is I think another kind of strategic split here that maybe should frame this conversation is how we conceptualize of the bargaining table. And I think many on the majority of the team placed too much onus on what is actually happening at the bargaining table versus what is happening on the ground. And I think this is an important way as we debate about voting yes or no on this contract, and the potential risks involved with either of those options, that what we do at the bargaining table is really secondary, right? It's a way for the UC to communicate with us, a way for them to actually like make these concessions. But theories like well, if we come down this much, then the UC will come up this much have been shown to be rather silly, I think, given the actual UC's movement there. So I think we should be conceptualizing what happens at the bargaining table only in terms of as a function of our power, like on the ground. And so that's where we need to keep our focus. And so in light of that, I think for ASEs, this question of our power coming from disrupting grades, disrupting the start of instruction next quarter, makes a lot of sense. There's kind of a clear vision there. I think most people understand. The question for SRs, I think, is a more complicated one, and I think this isn't something that has a kind of single answer, right? It's going to vary a lot depending on the nature of your work, what department you're in. And so this is not something where I can provide an answer of this is the SR's leverage point. I think this is something that every lab, every department, every division kind of needs to figure out for themselves. And I think what we've tried to do at Santa Cruz is to provide a framework for doing that, what we've called power mapping. And so, I mean, this process would be one in which department organizers would get together, contact people in their department. First, figure out who's actually on strike in your department. I mean, this number is going to differ a lot from the number of people actually on the picket line, right? These are different things. To figure out what they're actually withholding. I think what we've actually seen throughout the strike is that the ways people are striking is varied in a lot of different ways. And so figure out what they're withholding. And then I think third, figure out what upcoming deadlines do they have, right? Is there a paper that's about to be published? Is there a conference that they were going to attend? Is there, a major grant deadline coming up? Is their PI really hounding them to get some data submitted? I think, once we have a clear conceptualization of what labor is there to withhold there, what pressure points exist, we can start thinking strategically about which of these things is most impactful to the university. And importantly, also which is not. So I think at Santa Cruz, for instance, there have been some departments where people have gotten a lot of pressure to start attending lab meetings again. And I think, some people came to the consensus as a lab that to not permanently fray their relationship with their PI, they would start attending lab meetings, but continue to not do experiments, continue to withhold data, et cetera. And I think, once we have a shared vision, collectively decided vision of where our power as a department comes from, you can then make determinations about, okay, how do we make the strike sustainable? Where are people facing the most retaliation? Are there types of things that we can resume that's not directly, is not going to directly impact the university? And so I think those determinations will look different for each person, for each department, for each lab. But I think the important thing is that they're decided and strategized around collectively as a department. And then I guess the very last thing I'll say here is just, I think, just a brief commentary on the vote itself. I think, this is not just a question of what happens after a no vote. This is also a question of what happens after a yes vote, right? This is a question of, we'll have another strike probably in 2.5 years, even if this contract goes through. I mean, even if, we're in contract, we'll have, probably the need for labor actions around a bajillion contract enforcement issues. And so I think a vote yes, we are making a decision to relegate some of these important issues, 2.5 years down the road, and continuing to fight, and organize around the issues that we can still win in the contract. I think a vote no, I think, a lot of people have framed this as something anti-union or some sort of catastrophe. I've never seen it that way. I think a vote no is really just a mandate to the bargaining team to go back to win more. And I think in light of that, we shouldn't just be voting no if we think the contract's insufficient. But if we decide collectively, if we talk to people in your department, actually think through a strategy of what a strike would look like long term. Where is the actual PowerPoints in your department? And I think if we have a vision of that, and there's a commitment there to continue striking to win more, then that would be a reason to vote no.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jacob, for your thoughts. Next, we're going to have Johannah and Paul, who are student workers from Columbia, here to speak about their experience successfully organizing after a no vote. Johannah and Paul, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Hey guys, so I'm gonna speak first and then I'll hand it off to Paul. My name's Johannah. I'm a PhD candidate in English at Columbia. I was a rank and file organizer during our no vote and the subsequent strike. Now I'm a steward. So I just want to start off by thanking you guys for inviting me and saying how much I and really we all at Columbia admire what you're accomplishing right now. It's really no exaggeration to say that your strike and contract is going to change the higher ed labor movement for at least the next decade. So what you're doing here is incredible. It's also been fascinating hearing all of the challenges you're facing, both what I'm hearing in this conversation and in previous conversations, because while our campuses are different, a lot of the lines that you guys are hearing from the administrative caucus are exactly what we heard as well. So while I was thinking about what I wanted to say here, I started thinking back to Columbia's no vote campaign in spring of 2021 and just how exhausting it is. I know that there's one day left in your ratification period, so I imagine that you guys are feeling really similarly now. And that's why one of the messages that I'm hoping to talk about is just asking you to hold on to your hope. To be honest, we didn't think we would win our no vote at any point at Columbia. Hardly anybody did. We basically campaigned to vote down the concessionary TA because we thought it was the right thing to do, so we just did it. But hardly anybody expected it would go anywhere. And the good news is that for a lot of reasons, your prospects, both for the no vote and honestly for the strike, are just so much stronger than ours ever were. So I really want to tell you guys that just because you feel exhausted and probably occasionally hopeless doesn't mean that you can't win or that you should give up. We felt horrible the entire time and we still won. So hold on, it's not too much longer for you guys. And that applies to your strike too. So at 5 to 6 weeks, which I think is where you guys are, we had won hardly any concessions. I regularly heard from colleagues who decided to return to work. I heard from faculty who told us that what we were holding out for was impossible. They said they didn't want to fight admin when we asked for their help. They said that we were harming undergrads and they didn't want to harm undergrads for goals that were unattainable. And it felt awful to hear that. But the fact is that for better or worse, we were a minority strike for most of the fall of 2021. And we also faced major disadvantages like docked pay and threats to reassign us to less prestigious positions if we didn't return to work by grading deadlines. That ended up not mattering. By voting no, we won raises of up to 32.8% with a 12-month floor of 44K. We won grievance and arbitration for sexual harassment and discrimination for the first time. We won full union recognition, including for casual hourly workers, and we won dental coverage, again, for the first time. And pretty much all of those concessions didn't arrive until weeks 8 or 9. So if we had given up at the point that you guys are at, we wouldn't have gotten any of those things. And that's what leads me to believe that you can and will win this fight. I know you guys are probably tired and you're probably seeing your numbers dwindling, but as long as a core group of committed workers like you holds the line, you'll be successful because universities are held together basically with chewing gum and they're really vulnerable and you guys can take them down. So I can't predict with certainty what will happen here. I can really only share our experience that concessions took a long time and then flooded in around major deadlines and as accreditation got riskier for the university. And I suspect that that's what will happen for you too. In any case, you'll have to figure out what to do next after tomorrow. There's a lot of work ahead to put together a more democratic union, regardless of how you vote in the TA. That was something that became a priority for us. And I'm happy to talk to anybody here or in another context about what that consisted of. We made reforms like it's now written into our laws that the bargaining team can't make any decisions except through votes by the rank and file, which are binding. And we also instituted a policy that said we would vote every week on whether to continue our strike. Those were really important reforms. And I hope you guys can do something similar. In any case, my closing thought is just don't lose hope. You are so much more powerful than you realize, and we're all watching you. So we're really excited. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Paul, who can talk about more STEM and research-specific issues.
Yeah, thanks, Johannah. Yeah, my name's Paul. I'm a PhD student in the chemistry program at Columbia. I actually came to Columbia after the no vote, like in the fall, and so I wasn't involved in that, but I started getting involved organizing for the SAV and basically the strike. And there were a lot of the same sort of questions that I think everybody's happening is like, how do you strike from research? Because it's, again, like as people said, it's not the same as other sort of labor, because if we completely withhold everything, the person that we hurt tomorrow is primarily ourselves. And so when we think about that question, I think it's worth thinking about like how our research provides value to the university. This is what Mark was, I think, talking about a little bit, but maybe the two main ways that I can think of that our research provides value is overhead fees, where I don't know if people know, but basically the university, every grant that our research brings in, the university takes a certain percentage of that. And at UC, I looked it up, the UC system, or at least UC Berkeley, it's about 60% of that grant goes straight to the university. And so the universities bring in Columbia brings in hundreds of millions of dollars from overhead fees. And the Columbia is a fraction of the size of the UC system. So the UC makes so much money off of that. And also they're interested in the prestige, the marketing prestige that our publishing provides. They're not actually quite so interested in the research itself. And so I think it's just really, as like Mark and others were saying, there's, it's a little bit work smarter, not harder. We can, by withholding like reporting data to labs and PIs and to funding agencies, that basically directly strikes at the heart of where the universities derive value from us, from our labor, without sacrificing our dissertations quite so much. And at the same time, I also just wanted to say that like we were, Mark said that we tried maybe harder than anyone else with a research strike. Honestly, I don't even think it was that much. We were nowhere near as organized in terms of researchers as you all are at the UC system. And so that's actually been really inspiring for me to see. And I hope to sort of use some of the lessons from you for the next time we bargain. But it wasn't even like ever really an idea to completely strike from research here. And there was never even brought up the argument that might be considered partial striking. Nobody from us or from the UAW ever sort of said that withholding data would consider partial striking. So I think that's worth saying. But again, I guess I just want to say that what you all have done has been truly inspiring in terms of like visualizing and sort of figuring out what striking as researchers is like. And then I guess I also just want to say, like other people said, this TA could be the floor for future negotiations, not the ceiling. And also I think there's some real wisdom in the idea, one day longer, one day stronger. Strikes have been successful long before media and Twitter. And so I think that's worth keeping in mind as well. But keep up, regardless of what happens, we're standing with you. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Johannah. Thanks, Paul. Last, but certainly not least, we have Jackie Galvez, who's a rank and file organizer with our union from the Department of Integrated Biology. She's a fourth-year PhD candidate, current fellow, and previously has served as a GSI. Jackie, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Kenzo. I appreciate it. I'm very excited and proud to be with you all here today. I've been really inspired by our strike efforts in the past 6 weeks, and if there's a poster child for getting involved in union organization while having previously zero experience, it's me. I really wasn't as tapped in previous to the strike until our strike authorization vote happened. And this whole process has really encouraged me to continue being involved in organizing both now and long after our strike is over. And so just to echo Abrar's sentiment at the top of this event, we're all here today to gain some clarity as to the path moving forward following our strike. We have heard from a labor relations professional, members from our bargaining team, and student workers from both UC Berkeley and Columbia, and each has offered their own unique perspectives on various paths forward, particularly what long-haul strike organization looks like for student researchers and what we can do to successfully win more. It goes without saying that this ratification vote has been incredibly divided, and regardless of voting outcome, there is much work to be done. We have built power and solidarity with one another throughout this strike, and we must leverage this going forward, whether or not these tentative agreements become our contracts for the next 2.5 years. And it's really important to have these candid conversations about what to expect with these options now in terms of a yes or a no vote, because if we plan now, then we'll be adequately prepared for what's to come. And in the case of a yes vote and the adoption of these tentative agreements, our path forward will be to advocate for more democratic union organization and to channel our collective energy into contract enforcement. Many, though certainly not all of you, may be feeling frustrated with the bargaining process that took place over the past 6 weeks. I know personally I have. I've heard people in both the for and against camps express confusion toward bargaining decisions, particularly in the beginning of the strike when things weren't as transparent. Many folks felt as if there was a lack of polling, a lack of transparency, and a lack of centralized information to turn to. And this was only exacerbated when many bargaining team stances were decided by a slim majority, sowing distrust in the bargaining process that I'm sure many of us are feeling. And the best way to remedy this going forward is to, simply put, stay involved. So joining and developing subcommittees, attending union meetings, campaigning and voting for union leadership, and getting involved with rank and file organization, using all these avenues to advocate for what you would like to have seen in this strike and what you want to see going forward. I personally plan to join a committee centered on polling workers, as I was really frustrated by the lack of this during bargaining and during our strike, and I'm really excited to channel my efforts into that as we continue both during and after our strike. Ratification also means that we have a lengthy contract enforcement and grievance process ahead of us. For contract enforcement, I would recommend that you form reading groups within your departments and extended networks and know what these contracts mean for yourselves and your fellow workers, and communicate to the faculty and graduate advisors in your department what that is. Make sure the people in charge of you know your rights and know how much you're supposed to be getting paid, because at the end of the day, it is up to us to enforce our contracts, should they be ratified. Along these same lines, I know many of us, especially in the STEM crowd, are counting on settlements and grievances to secure top-up funding. And according to the supplemental wages side letter that would go into effect should these contracts be ratified, the UAW and UC bargaining teams are meeting on January 18th to discuss settlements that aim to secure supplemental wages. And now is the time to meet with your department to develop a plan that meets your specific needs and ensures equitable pay among your graduate students. Because there's no simple one-size-fits-all solution, and we've heard that this is the reasoning the original top-up side letter was taken off the bargaining table from the bargaining teams, we have to continue to leverage our collective power and advocate for ourselves should these tentative agreements be ratified. For my department specifically, integrative biology, we've already started some of this work. Again, I'm happy to say that I'm a part of that organizing team should the majority of our workers vote yes on these contracts. And for those of you in other departments, particularly with big top-up amounts, I really encourage you to get your team together now, because our union will be reaching out and asking you for your perspectives before that January 18th meeting. So start working now, and hopefully you can save yourself some pain with the grievance process in the future, if it comes to that. And I think it's important to note that when it comes to discussing paths forward following a yes vote, the process may seem more straightforward. What often leads to more uncertainty is brainstorming for what happens if a majority of our workers vote no on the tentative agreements. And the question of the day is, how do we sustain a long haul strike? For student researchers, this question is of particular importance, as our labor does not only benefit the university, but as many have mentioned, is intrinsically tied to our dissertations and our career progress. How do we continue to withhold labor with maximum harm to the university and minimal harm to ourselves? From one student researcher to another, I'd like to offer some suggestions while acknowledging, as Jacob said earlier, that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Research is dynamic and varied, as it should be, and we will need to continue having these conversations for as long as the strike persists, whether that be one more day, one more week, one more month, or longer. In light of this, it might be helpful to think about this prolonged strike in one of two ways. What labor do we withhold, and what actions against the university do we take? And when discussing what labor to withhold, it's important to recognize our dual experience as both workers and students. As student researchers, this is a blurry line, as I mentioned, because our dissertation work is simultaneously ours and the university's. We want to maximum harm to the university in this case. While this looks different for each department and each campus, a good rule of thumb that I've been focusing on is maintenance over progress. Speaking from a biologist perspective, those of us with living organisms may choose to take care of colonies to ensure their survival, but we can choose to withhold progress or the beginning of an experiment for the duration of the strike. And this is just one example of prioritizing maintenance over progress, and I'm sure many of us can think of similar ideas as well. And echoing Paul's sentiment from just a little while ago, as we continue to organize in the case of a no vote, it's really imperative that we brainstorm how the university benefits from our research, whether that be in grant to overhead fees or otherwise. And we can therefore make plans to withhold that labor specifically. This will inevitably evolve as the strike continues, and I encourage you to form organizing groups within your departments, between departments on your campus, and even across campuses in order to make some headway in thinking about this. It's also important to note that research by nature is collaborative, and a good rule of thumb to maintain good standing with collaborators is just to either continue doing maintenance work for those projects, and particularly open communication regarding the strike and when you anticipate fully returning to the project. We don't want to leave our collaborators in the dust, so having that communication is going to be really important moving forward, especially if they're not on a UC campus. They might not know what's going on and why you may have dropped off the face of the earth. Above all else, maintenance is really key here. And when we do return to work, we want our research to be in a position where we can pick up where we left off. On the opposite end, thinking about what type of actions to take, many of us have experienced through picketing thus far that direct actions are imperative to maximize our harm to the university and keep people engaged and motivated in our fight to win more. At UC Berkeley, there have been a number of direct actions that we can continue with a prolonged strike: teach-ins, sit-ins, direct conversations with colleagues and faculty, and my personal favorite are gas and loading dock pickets, which prevent critical deliveries necessary for research progression. These actions empower workers to keep fighting, and they demonstrate our strike power just as much as grade withholding does for student instructors. And another idea that came up in my picket locations chat, and I would like to give full credit to Kieran from SFUM for this, is cross-departmental organizing to democratically build our platforms and goals. We should have some idea of what we are fighting for, what we will and we won't accept. And this can only come with collective democratic organization, and we can spend our time listening to our peers and colleagues and deciding what realistic goals we will fight to win, both in the strike and also beyond. In all cases, for both labor withheld and actions taken against the UC, it's really imperative that we keep lines of communication open and we organize with each other. Share ideas of what your department is doing and form cross-departmental and cross-campus networks to help your fellow researchers grow our strike power in the event of a no vote. And to quote maybe one of our chants that we used to say back on the picket line, this is what democracy looks like. It looks like listening to workers and collective action to meet our needs. It's important to remember that in the case of a no vote, it signals to the university that the majority of our workers not only believe in the power of our strike, but are willing to continue harnessing this power to win more. A sustainable strike for student researchers will be key to these efforts. Following these basic guidelines and continuing to brainstorm more will allow us to be simultaneously flexible and powerful as we continue our historic strike into the spring. And I really hope this conversation is the first of many to come. Regardless of voting outcome, we must use our collective power in this moment and carry that momentum forward. The fight isn't over, it's only just begun, and I personally can't wait to see where it takes us. Thank you so much for your time.
Jackie for president. Oh my gosh. Thanks so much, Jackie, for wrapping us up on such an incredible and inspiring note. So with that, we will now transition to our Q&A. Thank you again so much to all of our speakers. I'm going to reiterate specifically how we're going to now run